Anthony, milked every night he could, from every word of his father's instructions, on taking supplies to the young refugee now inhabiting the abandoned farm. The moon had completed its cycle, but he waited for a new day before loading the small cart. He hadn't much interaction with white people, born in the territories, and he anticipated this chore with high anxiety. Grinding along the gravel behind him, guilt took the form of his cart as deep down, he knew his pa had meant for him to go the day prior. Reaching a skiff tied from a tree, Anthony drops a pair of bound burlap and gives special care to a parcel aboard the plus-sized craft. As the sail lowers, he takes the rope from around the oar girth and grabs the rudder with his blistered black fist. A boat called Redemption glides into the channel, and Anthony conquers the bend. Sweet grass abounds on the farm as smoke lies comfortably in the shade. Chicks surround Caroline, her wide bottom braced by a stool in the yard. The last of the meal, she doles out to the yellow chick peeps climbing and tripping over themselves. Calm and collected, she lifts her eyes to follow the tree line, dismissing the horizon. When a sail interrupts the stacks of green, she brushes herself and walks steadily to the edge of the dock. Anthony ties a rope to the pole and stands to the bow in demonstration.
"Hello, miss,"
Anthony says, timidly trying to mimic his father's baritone. Caroline nods and folds her arms in a dominating fashion. Her dress was too small, and Anthony wondered how his mother might better situate the reclaimed garment. Her tattered appearance compromises her intended power stance, and yet she persists. Noticing the freight, Caroline softens a bit. Trying to maintain her moment of authority, she demands to know, "Is there cornmeal in there?" Anthony nods to indicate that there is. As her arms surrender, she continues, "And bacon?" The boy answers with a big smile, but she won't return one. She breaks a little and beckons to the house before abandoning the boy to return to the yard, excited by the prospect of a proper meal. For a house with no one to host, Caroline finds plenty of chores to permit the courier, Anthony. One by one, the burlap sacks find their way inside. First to the porch, then brought in and adequately distributed to the kitchen via the dining room table. What remains to unpack is a large jewelry box and a letter of parchment. Failing to recall what task she had fabricated next for the boy, Caroline ignored Anthony, who finished and waited in the doorway. Gawking around, she finally acknowledged the boy, and he nodded his farewell before shutting the blue door. Caroline never sat on the bench by the door. She didn't have boots, and the ones she could find were too small or enormous to accommodate her sensitive feet. She sits there now, opposing the dining room. Recalling the welt in her stomach, she endured for days avoiding the house, she shakes the apprehension to storm through the parlor onto her plunder. Lifting the jewelry box lid, Caroline recognizes the sound and contents with fond recollection and sets it aside to play out. Bathing in the notes, Caroline swoons in them, churning the dullness of the plaster walls with familiarity for the first time. From a fife, this tune was offensive, but from plucked metal, it resonates with ease to her pink ears poking through dark strands. As the symphony comes to a close, Caroline stands up from her seat and notices a letter with an anonymous purple seal lying on the ground. She hesitates momentarily, feeling a sense of foreboding, before picking it up and breaking the wax seal with her finger. To Caroline's relief, she recognizes the familiar handwriting of Thomas on the page, her beloved. The letter begins with the endearment "Dear my dove" and explains the reasons behind Caroline's seclusion. Thomas expresses his regret for not being able to save Melody, Caroline's sister, and asks her to be brave as he fulfills his end of a bargain with the militant group who attacked them. Caroline's eyes fill with tears as she reads the words that confirm her worst fears. She continues to read that Thomas has used the bounty given for Teresa's safe return to arrange her passage away from fighting to the south banks of Lake Michigan. Here, he has claimed the farm Caroline is currently filling, which was once owned by settlers following French Jesuits up the Mississippi into the Great Lakes region. A Haitian man named Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable and his Potawatomi wife Kitihawa had been pushed from their eager beginnings by Caroline's father, his cannons, and the impending war. Trappers Jean and Kitty depended upon the Great Lakes' natural order, and the outcast duo had neither aligned with the classic conquerors nor the precocious pioneers before evacuating the land. As of now, it seemed unlikely the settlement would ever welcome back the previous stewards. It was a selfish prayer left by Thomas in Caroline's letter that the abandoned farm could now serve as a new home for the new life they dreamed of. A life together and far removed from their current obstructions or their parents' business of foolishly flipping furs. His letter ends with Thomas's promise to return home and advice to Caroline to keep the letter close to her heart until he does. Caroline sat at her desk, staring at the letter before her. Her mind is awash with a mix of emotions, ranging from grief to nostalgia. Trying to distract herself, she turns to the music box beside her. The box is old and worn, with a stained satin lining that speaks of years of use. As she runs her fingers over the surface, she returns to feelings of home. Then her eyes fall upon Melody's brooch, a beautiful piece of jewelry made of ivory and silver. The brooch that had once belonged to Caroline's first friend, her sister, brought back fond memories of dressing up. The intricate carving of a mother and daughter beneath a birch tree catches Caroline's eye like never before. The details are so intricate that it seems as though the figures are moving. Caroline's emotions stir the porcelain scene in her hand, reminding her of the vase she now owns in her parlor, which boasts a similar depiction of a goddess amidst cherubs in the forest around its base. Caroline is inspired by the symmetry of it all. Picking up a butter knife, Caroline starts to scrape black lines into the brooch's matte silver, carefully mimicking the birch bark in the yard. As Caroline carves, she feels connected to her sister and their shared memories. Finally, Caroline fixes the chain around her neck and wipes her eyes. The brooch symbolizes closure and peace, and she feels grateful to have a piece of her sister near her heart.
Chapter 7. City of Sticks. As Jimmy sits in his dimly lit office, he stares blankly at the white ceiling, waiting out Carlotta's affair in his hotel. Elegant walls, the sturdy door, and a blown green glass lamp, which once shone brightly, now all appear dull, shabby, and lifeless to the pouting gangster. The room seems empty, and the only sound is the soft clicking of the fan's motor. Jimmy has been lost in thought for hours in his own world. After finishing his fifth cigarette, he finally snaps out of his reverie and decides to take a drive to clear his head. Outside, the sleek and shiny black limousine awaits him, and he quickly climbs inside. The engine roars to life, and they speed off into the night, leaving the empty office behind. Jimmy is back in his office the following day, slumped over in his chair and sound asleep. Carl Otten never returned. Tommy comes to check on him and gently nudges his feet off the desk. Jimmy stirs awake and looks around, disoriented.
"Come on, man,"
Tommy says.
"let's get you to a bed."
Jimmy nods reluctantly, handing Tommy the keys to the limousine before stumbling towards the elevator. A short bellman watches them discreetly as they exit the lobby, barely acknowledging their presence until the elevator doors shut. Then he watches intently as the needle stops at the golden number 3 and stays away from the floor Carlotta has been working.
Pop. Pop. The peaceful calm of the night is interrupted by the sound of small explosions that crackle and snap against the pavement. Two young girls scream in delight, their high-pitched voices competing with the hearty laughter of the boys around them. Startled by the commotion outside, the mayor hastily shuts the window of the nearby station. Meanwhile, the mayor's wife, Merinda, crouches next to Carly, frantically trying to cover the trembling girl in the police station with a thin, inadequate blanket. James, seated beside the desk, is struck by a sense of disbelief as he listens intently to the sheriff's meticulous note-taking.
"All right, boys, that's enough for now. Let me and Mrs. Sinclair take her home,"
the gray-haired politician says, nudging the sheriff to follow him. The young officer reluctantly stands up from his chair and yields it to its former owner. A solitary figure stands tall in the far-off corner of the room, the old landscaper. This middle-aged man had been given a second chance in life years ago by the mayor, and he has proved to be a loyal friend ever since. Tonight, he had stumbled upon James and Carly leaving town, released them from their restraints, and carried Carly back in his arms. Under his cap, the groundskeeper brooded with fists clenched and arms crossed. Sinclair summons him to retrieve Sheriff Cy Frazier, the newcomer who replaced Sinclair some 3 years back. Frazier was an inexperienced trooper from downstate, eager to establish his name in the town.
Yay, okay. But first,
The sheriff begins as being hurried along by the mysterious groundskeeper unusually empowered for his station.
Don't worry, Cy.
Sinclair cuts in and puts a hand between the young sheriff and Carly. He assures the diligent man out of the office.
We got a call into the dock. He will meet us at her uncle's with a nurse. Let's step out and let Mrs. S. do what she can for her.
The sheriff stood there, nodding with understanding after hearing the gentleman's plea. He then turned around to claim James, calling him a pretentious
son.
James looked around and started to comply, but Carly grabbed his arm, signaling him to stay back. Sinclair intervened, saying,
I think he will be hanging around. Come on, we'll watch for Archie to get back with the lads.
Carly couldn't hold back her tears, and James tried to put up a strong front by puckering his face. As soon as she saw James and Carly in distress, Mirinda, a woman known for her kind and caring nature, immediately took their hands and comforted them. Her warmth and compassion enveloped them, and they found solace in her embrace. Meanwhile, Sinclair, known for his charismatic personality, distracted the new sheriff by regaling him with exaggerated tales of his past adventures. Mirinda was lost in thought when she suddenly became aware of the landscaper's presence again. She looked up and saw him looking at her. Without exchanging a word, she gestured towards the archaic phone hanging on the wall, hoping he would understand what she intended. To her immense relief, the landscaper nodded silently, acknowledging that he had received her message. As the 3 elders, including Mirinda, Sinclair, and the landscaper, appeared oddly aware of what was happening around them, they seemed to be preparing for something yet to come. They were careful not to show their concern to the frightened youth within their midst. They had faced similar situations before and were ready to confront whatever was ahead of them. As Sinclair stood there, he watched his wife trying to comfort the children while his friend approached the back of the room. His mind was in chaos as he tried to make sense of the years that had gone by. Despite his internal turmoil, he remained a skilled conversationalist, able to distract himself and others with his tales. The seasoned leader was careful, however, not to reveal the truth about the corruption on the small island, which could tarnish his reputation and his stories. Instead, he focused on telling the juicy headline tales that he had mastered over the years, shielding the innocent sheriff from the harsh reality of the island. Sinclair knew the young officer relieving him of his station was full of ambition and eager to advance his career, but was also naive and vulnerable to young desires. Sinclair felt his duty was to protect Cy and the fragile herd by keeping them all in the dark about the true nature of the island's long-kept secrets. Truthfully, the retired officer was wise enough to know only that he didn't know anything at all, and indeed, no one would ever uncover all the plots stirring in the straits.
Once abandoned and haunted, the old farmhouse had finally become a home again. But with most of the windows swollen and stuck shut from years of neglect, it was almost unbearable to be inside during the scorching daylight hours. On Anthony's last visit, he brought some citrus, a rare treat for Caroline, who had stretched the sugar and made refreshing lemonade. She now stands on the porch, sipping her drink and admiring her horse, Smoke, as he gracefully trots around in the backyard. Caroline had donned a once unfamiliar sundress, which she had managed to keep clean while doing her final round of chores. As she hums around the property, she notices some brown sails in the nearby inlet and alters her course towards the dock. Her big grin calls out to the sailor as a wave assaults the shore, trying to tarnish her dress with its fray. "Good day," she calls out to young Anthony.
"Good day,
Anthony replied before recalling what his mother had taught him, adding,
ma'am."
Caroline peered down into the boat, observing ropes and nets that looked devoid of the groceries while the boy's smile remained.
"Would you like to go for a ride with me?"
Caroline whispered, "Are we to see Thomas?" Anthony's smile disappeared as he realized that he had misunderstood the situation.
"Excuse me, ma'am. I don't know any Thomas. But if you'd like, my mother said you are welcome to come to a party with me if you'd like.
Caroline stood on the creaky wood, feeling helpless.
Or I could go and fetch the groceries and be back tonight."
"Excuse me," Caroline corrected herself. No, Anthony, I am sorry, that sounds like a treat. I would be glad to go to a party with you. He went to the boat's rail and offered to help her aboard. She allowed him to hold her hand but jumped down unassisted, making it look suitable for the aspiring gentleman. Anthony took the rudder and carried them off across the channel. Caroline felt nauseous, which surprised her as she had never gotten sick from being on the water before. She swallowed hard and smiled, not wanting to discourage Anthony. After sailing away from the turbulent winds of the channel, Anthony secured the splintered wood, and the boat glided smoothly on the current. The sun's heat made Anthony look older than his actual age, and he had started to grow into his father's old and worn-out infantry jacket. Caroline dipped her hand in the cool water, which provided relief from the heat on her neck and back. As they sailed, a flock of unappealing grey birds followed a goose through the dark waters. As Caroline glances towards the water, she notices the shadows of the trees flickering against the sun. Her attention is then drawn to the first few stick buildings of a riverside shantytown, which comes into view. Looking up, she beholds the sprawling maze of the runaway city. In the background, she hears folk music and sees several lines of smoke rising in the air, marking a festive occasion. Anthony, who is manning the rudder of the Redemption, seems excited and eager. Caroline offers one of the ropes to a slender black man who greets them at the dock. Despite his curious glances, the man fades into the background as a clapping girl and a strutting lad catch Caroline's attention. Anthony proudly leads Caroline to join the festivities, marching towards the crowd. Custard, mashed potatoes, casseroles, and pudding. One table was filled with all of Caroline's favorite foods and thus her most resounding cravings since being hidden away. Dell stood at the head of the table, clapping. Anthony nudged Caroline and gestured towards his mother, causing Caroline to gasp in exasperation.
"Oh, Pigeon,
Dell called out.
come here."
She hugged Caroline's black and white head as Caroline maintained a grateful glance at Anthony. Anthony just smiled lovingly at his mother and new friend.
"Let's go, son, we have some questions I need to answer. You go find your brothers."
Anthony grumbled about being excluded but obeyed. Caroline was boiling water over a makeshift stove when she received the news about Dell's return to the governor's mansion. Her heart raced with anticipation as this news would have far-reaching consequences. In the recent past, the general's orders had been strict, but nobody except Caroline would have raised any questions about Dell returning following the escape. Dell had been in league with the rebels and was tasked to report to the Patriots regarding the family's resolve. Caroline was caught in a dilemma between loyalty towards her sister and her passion for Thomas. She listened intently to the story of her adopted mother's betrayal, waiting for the right time to make a decision, whether to thank her or raise an objection. As she struggled with her thoughts, she was given a newspaper article printed and obtained from Fort St. Joseph, a port still in British hands and half a day away. Fort St. Joseph had been her favorite of stops with her father for the classic French aspects, but now she recalled the days allotted for the trips. How far Caroline had been carried away splintered her previous dreams. What intent did Thomas have for his new bride in the heart of this fiercely debated wasteland of territory away from the sea? Caroline's curiosity took a dreadful direction as the rusted parchment depicted her in a purple bonnet as the Siren of Mackinac. The article claimed in bloody print that she had been responsible for recruiting and corrupting a young loyalist, Francis Copperbaum, and together they had led her own attack. Another article further implied that Caroline was the mastermind behind several dubious acts. Her actions had led to unpopular deaths in the area, all truly and commonly known to be casualties of British conflicts for trade. The news bulletin, presented with many others like it, also tempted rewards for any information that could lead to the return of the remaining daughter on the run and vagrantly criticized her band with familiar catchphrases frequently spat out by her father's propaganda machine. Caroline was shocked and infuriated by the article's contents. She had never met a Francis Copperbaum, let alone corrupted him. The article was part of a vicious campaign to discredit her and her supposed cause. She wondered how far her father would go to undermine the efforts of his foes, using his own daughter's trauma to ward his political advantage. Caroline's world collapsed under imminent disdain for the future and its cost. Broken, she spends the entire night in seclusion from the party, devastated and disgusted. Anthony tries to dance with her several times, oblivious to her pain, but Caroline's fake smile cannot hide her distress. Dell, sharing in her remorse, stays by Caroline's side, offering her comfort and support as best she can. Caroline's necklace, a parting gift from her sister, weighs heavily on her neck as she contemplates the cost of her freedom. As the night draws to a close, Dell whispers in Caroline's ear.
Forgive him, Pigeon. It was going to be one of you girls. I'm glad he chose you.
Caroline weeps as she realizes that nobody should get to be chosen at the expense of another. Despite her heartache, she musters the strength to bid Anthony's mother farewell and suffers a thank you for the groceries and a new, well-fitting dress. Dell watches from the dock as her son sails off into the night with Caroline guided by a flickering torch, heart heavy with empathy for her friend.